Welcome to this episode of the Growthcast Extended Cut. We are very fortunate today to have Rowen Turner on the podcast with us. Rowen, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Good. Yeah, we're really excited to have you. Before we dive in with Rowen and have her introduce herself, just wanted to remind everybody to like and subscribe to the podcast. If you haven't subscribed to us wherever it is that you're listening, go ahead and do that. Leave us a review and rate the podcast as well. That helps us reach a broader audience. And like we've said on, I think probably every extended cut or deep dive, that's what we want to do. We want to reach the broadest audience as possible and help as many people as we can. So the more you rate and review and subscribe, that the more people this gets out to. So we would appreciate if you would do that. Dallas, is there any other announcements before we dive in?
No, I'm just super stoked to have Rowen on because
even if
of
there
many
is
different dynamics. But
even if there is any other announcements, I can't remember them because I just want to dive right in with Rowen.
I usually have something, but I don't want to address any of it. I just want to talk to Rowen.
That's exactly what I want to do. Rowen Turner is one of the students in our network. She is a very powerful and influential student in our network. So we wanted to get her on the podcast and get some perspective from her. But before we dive into any principles and things we want to talk about today, Rowen, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you're listening from. I am Rowen Turner. I'm a leadership and culture innovator, real estate investor, and extremely proud and grateful student and part of the Multifamily Mindset family.
Awesome. No, that's the perfect introduction. Dallas, I know you have kind of a relationship there with Rowen. Is there anything you wanted to add about her?
Before we jump into questions with you, Rowen, and Jackson taking over because he's the questionnaire man, I wanted to just give a little bit of a backstory about Rowen and I. This is fun to have Rowen on, funner than any other guest, and I'm going to be partial here and say that because Rowen and I have cultivated a friendship outside of the Growthcast, and long before I even realized that she was one of our students, really. Tyler and I had talked to Tyler, and Tyler and Rowen have a relationship that goes further back than Rowen and I's relationship. And I brought up to Tyler one day, I said, hey, this person, Rowen, she reached out and I was like, she is a stud. I love her. Like, she is so inspirational and so kind and has such great insight. And I just enjoy talking to Rowen. Like, she motivates me. And he's like, oh, dude, Rowen is a bad A, I think is what he said. And he's like, she's so awesome. Her and I go way back. And he told me all these awesome stories about Rowen and how big of an influence you are on the people you surround yourself with. And it just made me want to cultivate a stronger relationship with Rowen. And so it's fun. It's the funnest guest we've had because of the relationship that's been cultivated over the course of a short amount of time. And also the other piece to that is Rowen, like she said, and like Jackson said, is one of our students. And really, we learn a ton from Rowen. I mean, student's kind of a funny word because it's a mutual relationship as far as student goes. But yes, within the network, within our company, within our education company in real estate, it's so awesome to have one of our students on. That's super powerful and super awesome.
Yes, definitely. Rowen, I know you just said it is what you do for a profession. Do you mind saying that one more time?
Sure. I'm a leadership and culture innovator.
Okay, and what does that entail? I've never heard. Again, Rowen, I don't know you very well, so I kind of want to get to know you just a little bit more, and so the listeners can get to know you as well. What does that entail? What is that you do?
For sure. So it's actually my own created title. It's my identity, if you will. And so in layman's terms, I'm an HR director. So I run all of HR function, operations, strategy for a business. But my passion is really around new age leadership, coaching, and culture. And so that's really why I focus on that, regardless of whatever formal HR role I actually operate in.
I love that. Why have you decided that the culture is more important than any other aspect of HR?
So, and it might be relevant to today's day and age, but you've heard it in some of the oldest like leadership books or business strategy books. They say culture eats strategy all day long. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have the people and the team and the mindset to execute it, it's worth nothing. And so, especially in this day and age where we're seeing our workforce really care more about just the paycheck. Like it's holistic, it's everything. I just think it's really important for this day and age to have that kind of focus.
No, I love that. And that already dropping bombs this morning, Rowen. You're already giving us these golden nuggets. That culture destroys strategy every single time, for sure. It's so much more important to have the culture and the happy people in place rather than the strategy or the structure or the system. I totally agree. And that's a golden nugget that we can pull right out of already. We're only 5 minutes in, and that's already a golden nugget we can pull out. I know that Dallas also mentioned to me that you teach about unbecoming. You know, I know there's some other questions that we were going to dive into, but I want to dive straight into unbecoming and kind of peel back that layer. Do you mind explaining to us what that is, the unbecoming?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do it like twofold if that's okay. So I'll first share the I'll share the inspiration behind it first, and then I'll unpack it. Unbecoming, it's actually a reference to a Paul Coelho quote. I think you guys know Paul Coelho, The Alchemist, because you guys talk about that book a lot,
yeah.
right?
I actually literally yesterday just finished the audio book. Again, it's like the third time I've read it. But I just finished it on my way to work yesterday. So yes, Paulo Coelho. He's my fellow. He's Brasileiro, which me and Jackson, we both lived in Brazil for quite some time. So
it's funny you bring him up.
That's cool that you brought him up.
Nice. Yeah. So I came across one of his quotes, and the quote goes like this. It says, "Maybe the journey isn't so much about becoming anything. Maybe it's about unbecoming everything that isn't really you, so you can be who you were meant to be in the first place."
Love that so
much.
much.
Just pause, right? To let it sink in.
No, no, that's powerful.
Well, I don't want to jump in too soon, and I don't want to cut you off from explaining something, but it makes me think, that quote and the term makes me think about another mental skill or another teaching component that I talk about often, which is, in order to learn new things, we have to unlearn certain ways of habits and old ways of being, which is that exact idea of unbecoming a certain person that we used to be, so that we can make room for the new version. Right?
Totally, and it's exactly that, Dallas. And so I'll go ahead and unpack it. So we talk a lot about becoming. And that makes sense, right? We want to become more, better, our dream self, if you will. And so visually I see, so there's who I am right now, and then there's this person who I want to be. And that gap in between those two people is the becoming, right? Like it's that process of transforming into that new state. And that whole becoming process can feel super overwhelming. And I just even think about the interactions I've had for myself, being in the multifamily space instead of just residential real estate, and then talking with other students. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and then just kind of get stuck in that becoming. Like, I'm not there yet, but I'm not where I am, but like I don't feel like I'm getting closer to who I want to be, if that makes sense. So becoming is about bringing yourself forward. Unbecoming, to your point, Dallas, is about bringing yourself backward, but backward all the way to our childlike state, where there is no fear, no worry, no doubt, only abundance and possibility and infinite joy. Does that make sense? And
for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we unbecome so that we can bring ourselves back to pure possibility first. So then it becomes easier to actually become and create your new desired state. I can give a visual. Here's a visual that's made sense for me that helped take that kind of altruistic, intangible thing to something more tangible. Is imagine that I was chocolate frosted cake, or that we were all chocolate frosted cake. And so I'm chocolate frosted cake and I want to be vanilla frosted cake. And so sometimes, or oftentimes, when we try to become, what we do is we just take vanilla frosting and try to put that all over us. But then we're not vanilla cake. We become like chocolate vanilla swirl, or like light chocolate frosted cake. You know what I mean? Like, you're not vanilla cake. Mm-hmm. And so the whole process of unbecoming is you take off all the chocolate frosting first so that you're just cake. And then you can be anything. And then if I choose to be vanilla, then I can add it on. And it's easier because you're removing that baggage. You're unlearning kind of all the stuff that you said. And the cool part is when you get really good at practicing unbecoming, and you are your childlike state, you actually don't have to become anymore, because you can just be. If your possibility at any moment in time, you can just, I'm going to be that, and you just do that and act accordingly.
Yeah, it's so powerful.
So powerful.
I love that you use the word child and childlike, or in a childlike state. You know, as children, none of us had fear of what other people were thinking when we screwed up. You know, I think of a child even just walking. They were just being. They were just present in the moment, learning, focused strictly on learning at all levels. And they weren't observant. You know, as a child, we're not observant of somebody looking at us. And it's funny because as adults, when a child's trying to learn something, right, we're not like ridiculing them or judging their progress. You know, a baby learning to walk, we're just excited. We're just watching in excitement. And somehow, some way, as we continue to get older, we let certain things get in our way that, you know, obscure that process and put a stop to it. And we don't find joy in learning. We don't find joy in, you know, failing upwards, so to speak. So my question for you with this whole which I loved your analogy of cake.
I have some questions too.
Yeah. I have a question that I'm going to pass off to Jax, but what are the biggest obstacles we face in unbecoming? You know, like from your experiences in working with so many people, in your professional life, in your business, what are the biggest struggles that people face with this process of unbecoming?
Before you answer that, do you mind if I throw in I think there's a
context.
I think there's a preliminary question that could be asked here. Then we can get into the objections that come when you're unbecoming. But Rowen, we have a lot of new multifamily real estate investors that listen to this call. We have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this call in general, or listen to this podcast. So the question that I want to ask is, when you're making that transition from, let's say you're working a 9-to-5 job and you clock in, clock out every single day, to making the transition into becoming a full-time multifamily investor, you obviously have to unbecome to become, right? What does that process look like? Before we get into the obstacles that come, what does that process look like from unbecoming? Like, what are some actionables that students can grab to start that process?
Gotcha. Sorry, I'm just writing down because my brain will like think of 5 million things.
No worries. That was a long-winded question.
And I'll speak to my personal journey, if that's okay. Like at least what it was for me. Yeah.
Perfect.
So for me, from my day job, if you will, to becoming an investor, the gateway for me was concurrently working on identifying and clarifying my purpose. Because then I started to transform and see this job or this thing that I do into, it's just an avenue in which I am who I am and I impact the world. And so this is where I say is like, I do have a 9-to-5 job, right? And it's a bigger role, so it takes a lot of my time. But what I've trained myself to believe from like 2 or 3 years ago is I said, I am self-employed, but that company just happens to be my biggest client.
I like that.
Yeah, that is so powerful.
It really is.
Because, you know, person over the professional, right? Like, identifying as an HR director and letting that precede or supersede everything else in your life, or kind of hover there at the top, is problematic. It is very problematic. I can speak to my own experience. Rowen, as you're talking, I'm thinking about my experience in exiting my job as a teacher, as a high school teacher. And once I started changing my identity, right, and unpacking all of this unbecoming and everything else that you're talking about, and identifying with, I am just me. I am a teacher. I am an influencer of behavior, right? And behavior modification was my specialty within the school district. Once I started going through this process of unbecoming and then becoming something else, it gave me a platform to view the world in a much different perspective that opened up my classroom. My classroom was no longer the 4 walls of a school. My classroom was no longer the 4 walls of the math, sophomore math. My classroom was the world. My classroom was my home. My classroom was every person. My student was every person I ever came in contact with. Learning became the vehicle everywhere. And that changed everything. That changed the trajectory of my business. It changed the trajectory of my life. And it just hits so home. And I love the way you're articulating this unbecoming piece, because it is as or more important when you're trying to change at a grand scale than anything else. You know, the unlearning part, the unbecoming part doesn't get talked about enough because we're so focused on becoming. And then again, confusion can settle in when we're only focused on becoming and mixing those two frostings together. And then it just becomes more confusing and more confusing. And you think you have to add more, but really like taking away is what is just as or more important.
For sure. So Ron, I just want to go back to that. I thought it was super interesting when you're starting the process of unbecoming to becoming a new person or a new individual or a new professional. The very first thing you said, and I know it's something that Dallas harps on as well as Tyler harps on it a ton as well, is defining that purpose, defining your definite major purpose so that you can make that change first in your brain, right? Like you said, your biggest client just became your 9-to-5, but you were self-employed because that's just what you decided, because that was your definite major purpose, right? So what did it look like for you? I know there's a few different ways to define your purpose. What did it look like for you defining your purpose? What did that process look like?
Yeah, so it was super clunky. So I can tell you, I would draw the analogy to
That's a good descriptive word.
Yeah, no, and it's honest too, because that's so true.
I would liken the experience to because you guys are both married, right? So
Correct.
Perfect, right? So you know that question you have when you're single and you say, how do you know that that's the one? And then everyone who's married says like, you'll just know. And you're like, what in the heck are you talking about?
Yeah, seriously.
And so I think that's kind of like the purpose journey is you just got to start somewhere, write it down and try it on and keep trying it on and adjust it. And as you're evolving, as you're unbecoming, as you're learning, as you're becoming, you know, just you're growing and changing and those sort of things as you learn more and more about yourself, you adjust your purpose to reflect that. And there's going to be some point where you're like, oh, that's a little more it, or, oh, that's it. And you'll finally get to a point, if you're disciplined and diligent about it, where you're like, oh my God, like that's it. And what I usually see is just a couple indicators is when your purpose is more concise, like that's usually more when you know you got it.
100%. Do you want to add anything to that?
What I'm thinking about as you're talking is, talking to you and talking to Tyler or talking to other individuals that we work with, it's very apparent who has been able to identify their purpose because they act and speak in a different zeal. They do things with a different energy. And I don't know, as you speak, that's something that I'm like, I'm just reflecting on in my own life is there's a light, like follow the light when you're going through that clunky process. When you feel that energy, when you see more good, when you produce more, those are telltale signs that like you're on the right path, in that clunky process. And also the other thing I wanted to address before we jump to the next question is there's a lot of listeners right now that are going, oh my gosh, like I totally relate to the clunkiness, and they might feel heavy. That might trigger some type of heaviness. Mm-hmm. And I would encourage them to flip that perspective, because the clunkiness is something to be celebrated, because that means that you're on the right track.
For sure.
You're on the right path. So rather than feel like, oh man, I'm clunky and it's cluttered and it's a little gray, you know what? Celebrate that. That's good. That means you're on the right path. And that means that there's more work ahead, which means that you'll become better and you'll figure it out. But it's also just a predecessor. It's a prerequisite for being able to do your best work, is to go through that clunkiness. And so students who are listening, any individual who's listening, if you're caught in the clunkiness, celebrate it. It's okay. It's a telltale sign that you're doing the work required.
And hey, Dallas, I know could I just like add in here, like just based on where the convo is going. So I know for students and just people in general, putting your purpose down and you're like, I'm having difficulty fine tuning. A complimentary thing that I did that helped me fine-tune the purpose statement was to create a mantra. And so it's essentially affirmations. And so what I mean by that is I created my mantra based on what I was learning about myself and how I think. So whenever I identified a belief that was not serving me, or when I could answer the question to say, if I'm not taking action and not getting this result, what would I wish would be different, where it would give me the confidence to actually take action? So what I mean by that is there's a couple pieces in my mantra where I said, I am fearless. I have all the resources I need to be successful. Everything is happening for me. And I would say that with conviction to myself in the mirror. And here's the crazy fun part is when you're saying it, you feel so inauthentic doing it. Like it feels so weird. And you're like, this is crazy. What am I even doing? But what I started to register that discomfort as is me not believing it. And that was the problem. And so what I just trained myself to do was say it and say it with conviction, keep doing it, and reprogram my brain until I started to believe it. Because the science shows us that the more powerful thing than your quiet brain telling yourself secretly negative talk over and over again every day is your outward voice commanding your brain a different direction.
Yeah, and some people would call that
huge.
manifesting,
Yes.
right? Like some people, I talk to students a lot of time and they're like, oh, manifestation's real. And I don't use the word manifestation as often as maybe I should. But it's just because I get caught in the database research component of, you know, all of this data pointing towards if you write something down, if you say it out loud. And again, yeah, a word that we could use would just be manifest those things outwardly. And it's crazy how much more powerful that type of ongoing process is than just thinking something in your brain and leaving it there. And that's why I got so passionate about a journal. You know, it gave me context. It gave me better context for organizing whatever it was that I needed to project outward. And again, sometimes that was repeating it out loud to myself day in and day out, but writing it down, bringing my focus to it and letting that be the main driver day in and day out rather than get stuck in my thoughts. It's a game changer. And, you know, people who are listening, we all need to be reminded, and we all need to know that if we want to get serious about unbecoming, if we want to get serious about learning, if we want to get serious about, you know, creating a new identity for ourselves and actually meeting that identity one day, we have to do the things that stack up as far as what the data and the research says. You know, people studied this for years in the world of positive psychology. There's a reason we reference all the things that we do. It's because it's proven. And if it's been proven, that means it's going to work for other people, including you. So saying things out loud to yourself in the mirror, you know, those affirmations, writing things down, repeating those over and over and over again and manifesting them outwardly instead of just getting stuck in the messiness of thinking about them, it is a game changer. Absolutely a game changer.
Rowen, I really liked how you said when you notice things about you, that those are the things that turn into your manifestations. Mm-hmm. So that really impacted me. Is oftentimes when I'm doing affirmations or I'm doing manifestations, it's things that I want to become or it's things that I want to do, rather than the things that I already am and the good things that I already notice about myself. So an actionable that I wanted to pull out of that comment that you made is, when you're doing your affirmations or when you're writing them down, Dal, like you were just talking about, is write down those good things about you that you already know, so that those things are at the forefront of your brain rather than the things that you're not and that you're trying to become. Because I think focusing on those good things that you already know that you are is just going to help you become those other things that you're trying to become.
Absolutely.
So that impacted me a ton. So thank you, Rowen, for sharing that. Super appreciate that.
For sure.
Rowen, I got a question. I kind of want to like transition this just a hair from unbecoming, unless Jackson has any last pieces on.
No,
super insightful.
No, yeah, I was actually going to go to a next question, but I'm sure it's actually the same question. Do you mind if I ask it?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So Rowen, as we kind of transition out of the unbecoming, thank you so much for sharing that. There was so many valuables and golden nuggets that we could pull from there for sure. But as we're wrapping up the podcast, I know we have a lot of women, mothers, wives, sisters in the network that are trying to balance the life of being a mom, being a wife, being a full-time employee, as well as becoming an entrepreneur. And I wanted to ask you, how do you do it all? You play an impactful role in multiple different areas in your life. How do you go about structuring your day to be able to do all those things?
Yeah. Okay, cool. And so I'll answer it twofold. So one is the mindset part, and two is the behavior part. So the mindset part is I don't actually try to do it all. I do only one thing. Because when I think of like work-life balance or how to do it, I think of quality of life, not quantity of life, right? I'm focusing on the impact I want to make, not how much more can I do, right? So when I'm busy, like having a to-do list and it's getting long, what I'm really telling my brain is be perfect and do everything. And that's not actually realistic. But when I bring it back to one thing, and we talked about it, it's really my purpose. And that's why I find it's so valuable to really put in diligent work every day, trying to discover what that might be for yourself, is when I let my brain focus on that one thing, what I'm really doing is giving my brain permission to focus on it and get wildly creative. And what I've learned and seen is that actually allows me to do more. It amplifies, it multiplies my ability to impact in that one area, which is so much more profound and rewarding than the stress of trying to do like 50 million things. I'll bring it back to the tactical thing that I do every day is, so in clarifying my purpose then, this seed of wisdom that I had really started when I was in high school. Can I do a shout out to Sacred Hearts Academy in Kaimuki, Honolulu?
Of course.
Oh man. Yes, you totally should.
But I live with the end in mind. And so when I was in high school, we had a class. It was Catholic all-girls school.
Stephen Covey principle, by the way. Begin with the end in mind. 7 Habits for Highly Effective People.
So the class we had attended it's called Death and Dying. And so what the big assignment that we had for the year was to plan our funeral. So everything from costing everything out to like who attended.
Why didn't my high school have a class like this? I want this class.
Yeah, that sounds
who
awesome.
attended, like what your casket would look like, what your eulogy would be. And honestly, that started to plant the seed for me. But at a young age, at that point, death was like a very far away event for me, right? And now that I'm older, I truly understand that tomorrow isn't promised. Like I literally could die today. And so the question I started to ask myself in the beginning of every single day when I was creating my to-do list was, if this all ended tonight, out of the 20 million things I just listed, what matters that I actually take care of today? And when that list, like I challenged myself and it took several months, but once that list started to match what I actually wrote down to begin with, that's when I found balance. And on top of the balance, I actually found joy and excitement. And I started to feel that shift from existing to really living.
Wow.
So you essentially did a pre-mortem as a credit in high school.
Yeah, yes.
Like there's a lot of uber successful businesses, and this is a tactic or a process that many like high level individuals go through. It's called a pre-mortem. You envision, your dying day and all the things that were left undone, and you problem solve this and gain clarity through going through a reflective process, right? One, I'm mad my high school didn't have a class like this. This sounds like freaking unbelievable, and I wish my high school would have had a class like this. But two, it reminded me of something that I do in my own life regularly, because if we're not careful, we can get caught back into the trap of adding more to our plate and just existing rather than thriving, right? And living life to the fullest, like we talk about all the time. And it's like once a quarter, I will go for a jog or a run in the cemetery near my home. And I go early in the morning when nobody's there, and I just go through a slow stroll once I get to the cemetery. And maybe this sounds creepy to some people, but it's not. The purpose of it has a lot of purpose. It has a specific purpose, and it's just literally to remind me of my mortality and where I'm at currently with my mission, with my purpose, and how I can amplify it day in and day out. Tyler, the multifamily mindset came to fruition because of this exact principle and this exact type of process. Tyler went to a funeral of a mutual friend that he and I have. His name's Tyson Brummett. He got in a tragic plane crash here in Utah. And that day changed everything for Tyler. That reflective pre-mortem process of, if this was my funeral, like how would I be remembered? What's my family situation like? What's the impact I'm making on the world look like right now? And look what that type of reflective process did for amplifying his actions and creating a larger impact in the world in terms of positivity, love, service, real estate, education, wealth. It's unbelievable. And I just want to second what you just shared, Rowen, and just challenge everybody to integrate some type of experiential piece in your life that will allow you or take you to the level of reflection you need in order to really unbecome, transform, and live out your purpose in your life. Because ultimately that's what we're all here for, is to figure out what that purpose is and then just do everything in our power to weed out trivial stuff that keeps us further away from it and give power to the things that take us closer to living it out at the highest degree possible.
For sure. Rowen, is there anything else you want to add? We're coming up on our time here, but I wanted to, before I pass it over to you, to see if there's anything else you want to add. I just wanted to thank you for your time this morning to jump on with Dallas and I to record and give some insight. It not only helped, I'm sure, our listeners that are going to be listening to this episode, but it brought a new light for me as well. So I just wanted to thank you for that. As we wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to add to the comments that Dallas just made?
No, honestly, I'm just super grateful again for the opportunity to get to be here with you guys. And I'll give a little bit of encouragement to everyone is, even though I have some things that I'm really grateful for in my life, we're all still really all in the same place, right? It's mindset work. You can get there. You will get there. You just got to keep it a focus. Stay connected with people and share your story, learn from other people. Because I think that's what we're all meant to do, to help encourage each other. So we can be our best selves and bring our dream lives to fruition.
Awesome. I want to add to that, Rowen. Our relationship came to fruition by you being courageous and just reaching out. I mean, when you get an intuition or a feeling or are inspired to reach out to somebody and say thank you, or just add value to a conversation or a compliment or whatever it is, connecting with like-minded individuals that are striving for the same type of work you're doing, it's a really powerful piece. And you've made my job better. You've made my life better. It's all about the relationships that we cultivate in this world of mindset, right? You go to the gym, you work out your body, you have your buddies at the gym you hang out with, but it's the same thing with mindset, right? Like-minded individuals taking care of that component. We can help each other, and that happens through communication. And I just wanted you to know that I really appreciate you having the courage to reach out, start a conversation with me. And I'm so grateful because now we have this friendship and we're on the freaking Growthcast, talking about these high level principles together. And you're bringing so much value to the table here. It just makes me so happy. And I think it's just a good reminder for all of us. We're in this thing together. We have a lot of people who listen to the Growthcast, a lot. We have thousands, tens of thousands of downloads in the last little while. And don't be passive. Don't be a passive learner. Engage with each other. There is power in numbers when it comes to working your mind out and learning together. So that's the only piece I wanted to add, Jax.
Awesome. Thank you, Rowen. Thank you again so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you, and so much value added to the Growthcast. Thank you so much. If you haven't liked and subscribed to the Growthcast, please go ahead and do that now. Again, Rowen Turner, thank you so much for being with us today. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take care.